Lesson 6. We start with the Niyamas. Yamas are defensive in nature. You refuse to participate or go along in certain tendencies, certain behaviors. That is only possible through awareness, by observance. You notice that you feel something, you notice that there is a reaction towards something that doesn't feel right. Then you step in and you say, no, I'm not going to go this way. I'm not going to go along with this. Niyamas are in line with the yamas, but they are more offensive in nature, so to speak. Defensive, offensive. It not in terms of the military, of course, but offensive in a sense that you must actively pursue to behave in certain ways. So, yamas are refusals, basically. In short, niyamas are ideals. The first of the niyamas is called Shaucha, and Shaucha is the practice of purity. Purity is a matter of, in English you would call it consistency. I use the word consequential or consequent, acting in a consequent way. It is indeed an English word, but native English speakers throughout time showed a little confusion by the use of the word consequent. I use the word consequent because I'm Dutch, and the word consequent is a very often heard word in the Dutch language. People use it in daily life situations all the time. Being consequent means to act in ways that are consistent with your beliefs. Why is this important? It seems like as if that is only common sense. But why is this important? Because we very often have a tendency to change in line with the situation we are dealing with. In an opportunistic way, so to speak. So while we may have principles, we easily deviate from those principles if that would just make things more convenient, more easy. That is a human behavior, a human tendency. It is only normal. That is why, just like with the niyamas, it is important that we have a look at it, see what it means and how it works, so that we become aware of this. Being consistent or consequent in your behavior applies, of course, to all the 5 yamas. If you adopt the principle of non-violence in your life, and it becomes an important principle to you because it makes sense and because it really helps, then you have to stick to that policy. You have to stick to that principle. Even when you end up in a situation where you are being pushed to the limit and you might lose control and end up violating that first principle. Being consequent means being principled. Being principled means to have a straight back, so to speak. That means that if you believe in something, you stick to it regardless. And to give you an example, throughout history, there are examples, we probably learn about those in school, of very courageous people. There are people in our history that stand out because they did something that sometimes even cost them their life. Heroes, people that fought for a cause and lost their life as a result. People that upheld the truth and did not give in to pressure to deny that truth and paying for that with their life. That is a form of purity. Strong principle that you will not compromise when the situation becomes a little bit difficult. It's a little bit extreme, but to give you a little bit an idea what purity means. Like with the previous principles, one of the things that comes with the practice of purity is that you become predictable. People start to understand. People start to understand what you stand for. People rely on a certain behavioral pattern because they know you are principled. And this results in trust. It results in respect also. On the surface you think, why would I do this? It will just make my life more difficult. But on a deeper level, it has many positive implications for ourselves. Because the world around us will act and react accordingly. If we are not pure, we don't practice purity, we are not consistent in the ways that we deal with situations, when we become unpredictable, it will make people hesitate. It will make people find it difficult to rely on us or to trust us. Purity comes into play also very much where it comes to our heart's content. Purity means to be honest with ourselves, bluntly honest. Purity is basically covering the previous 5 yamas as we have learned them so far. I gave you an example of my interest in martial arts. My Hapkido buddies did what I wanted to do on a very short term, and it took me many years to prepare properly. Purity here means, regardless of the obstacles that you come across, regardless of the losing sometimes view of ever being able to realize that difficult project that you have set your heart upon, that you actually stay on that path regardless of the difficulties, the obstacles, the challenges that you come across. And also, I talked about my dogs. And it all sounds like a fantastic story, but that first year was incredibly, challenging, to use but a word. I told you that I decided to adopt Bobby so that I could reunite those two. That was not a need that I had, that was a need that they had. I visited for 2 weeks, spread out over 2 weeks. I visited the shelter 5 times, and the 6th time I would bring her home. The night before I was going to bring her home, I had a panic attack. And I started playing with the idea of canceling the whole thing because it was too overwhelming. She was so unstable, so difficult to handle, impossible to handle. And I already had a difficult, sensitive dog at home. Purity kicked in. And I dismissed the feeling, the playing with the idea of just canceling the whole thing because it is just too much, too overwhelming, too difficult, was overruled by the sense of, you can't do that. They need each other. And you engaged in this process and you have to finish it. The future will show whether it was the right decision or not. Another anecdote about purity, and it has many other angles too, about emotion and about ego, is I come from a big family. I have 3 brothers, and 2 of them were on a destructive path of alcohol abuse for one, and the other drug abuse. I grew up with them. They were very close to my heart. It's one of the reasons why I needed to get away from my environment, because I had chosen my direction but was constantly held back by their misery, basically, because family is, how do you say, thicker than blood? How do you say that? It's very difficult to rationalize. No matter how much you meditate and no matter how much you rationalize, family ties are just unbreakable, no matter how much it distracts you or how much it disturbs you. Anyway, long story short, in 2008, one of them died because of drug use. In 2011, the other one died in his mid-40s because of alcohol abuse. So I was in Korea. People had told me, people who knew me, who knew my brother died in 2008, I went to the funeral. So they said, this time they said, if your brother is that sick, you better go there now before he dies. Because that's what you did last time, he died, and then, so now at least if you go early, at least you can still see him, spend time with him. So I went for 10 days and I came back. Then it was in the middle of a course, so I had to cancel one class. 2 weeks later, on Saturday morning, at that time we started at 10 o'clock. So I was ready to go, my bag was ready and I had my clothes on. I was about to leave the house. I lived across the street from the studio at that time. I was about to leave the house and the telephone rang and my sister called me and she said, your brother passed away. And I was just about to go out. And so the floor disappeared under my feet. And I thought, oh my God, no. And I started to feel very emotional, of course. And the first thought that came up was, I have to cancel class. I can't teach today. And then I thought, you can't do that. Purity kicked in. If I cancel class now, there are 25 people. Most of them have already arrived at the studio. If not, they are still on their way. And at that time, there were people from Daegu, from far from Seoul. Just like with Bobby, when I had a panic attack, I just couldn't cancel. Why? Out of purity.
But did you teach sorry to us?
Huh?
Did you teach normally?
Well, that's part of the story. I just decided I cannot. And you know, I asked myself several questions. What if I cancel? Am I just going to sit here at home all day feeling sorry for myself? And then I'm going to start feeling guilty because I have victimized 25 people for my misery. So I started putting the pieces of the puzzle together and I said, it's impossible. I have to go. And it was 9:45, so I really had to go. So I just went. And I first tried to act as if nothing happened. So I started the class. The class always starts with a lecture. I started to rattle off, but very mechanical, like a robot. So after a couple of minutes, I just said, stop, wait a minute. I have to tell you something before we continue. I told the class what happened. They knew that my brother was sick, and because I had to cancel one class to go home to see him, so they were aware of the situation. I told them what happened, then proceeded with the class, and it became one of the most inspired classes that I ever had. It became a beautiful, a wonderful class. But I first had to just take away that obstacle that was there, that I knew what was happened, but they did not. And I cleared that obstacle simply by first explaining in short what had happened, and then just resuming the class, and it became one of the best classes ever. And I realized that is a matter of consistency, or being and acting in a consequent way. I realized also it was the right thing to do. Had I cancelled, I would have had two major emotional struggles. One, just sitting there all day feeling sorry for myself is stupid. Now at least I did something constructive with that emotion. I canalized it and it turned in one of the most beautiful classes I ever had. And two, I would have felt guilty of sending all those people home. And everybody, but especially those that came from far away. So we talked about the yamas. Yamas we violate often subconsciously because it seems to be the easy way out, the convenient way to deal with situations. Here you have the same issue. You have to ask yourself questions. Where is this going? What am I, and why am I doing this? And then you come to the conclusion that it is because of an emotion that you identify with that you're about to create a big situation, a disaster almost, I would say. Because of a reaction that is uncontrolled, triggered. And why do we do that? We do that because we identify with the emotion, which is caused by ego. Now you see on page 2, at the bottom where the donkey is being lifted up by the cart that he's pulling, you see that paragraph there. In order to purify and reach purity, we must let go of anger, malice, regret, a guilty conscience, and all other negative emotions. And this is crucial. This is about emotions, and the emotions are poisoning us from within if we do not handle them for what they really are. And the reason why we do that is because of ego. Because of ego, we identify with an emotion and we start feeling sorry for ourselves. It is because of this that we hold on to grudges, that we have hatred in our heart, that we find it impossible to look at situation from another person's point of view and feel compassion or even forgiveness. emotions are being viewed by most of us from the wrong perspective. That is why we suffer from them. That is why we feel hurt from them. An emotion, if you just look at it from a rational point of view, is a signal. An emotion is our teacher. It teaches us that something is going on. And in a bad case, it teaches us that something is going wrong. So, it is natural that we are affected by an emotion, but the thing that we usually do wrong with emotions is we stay on the surface of the emotion, just undergoing the emotion without doing anything constructive with it, without actually drawing a conclusion, a rational conclusion from it. Your life will completely change once you can make that switch where you take the first hit of the emotion and then you flip the switch and you start looking at it rationally. That is what I did when I had the panic attack with Bobby. That is what I did when I received a phone call 15 minutes before the start of class that my brother passed away. First hit by the emotion or the fear, the anxiety, the panic, and then flipping the switch and saying, what's going on here? What do I need to do with this sudden jolt of emotion? And when you rationalize it, you cannot give in to that first tendency to react based on that emotion, because you realize, the moment that you rationalize, you realize that it's going to cause a lot of harm. In case of the dogs, it would have caused harm to the dogs. In case of the yoga class that was about to start, it would have caused a lot of harm to a lot of people, and also to myself. So, not easy. That is why it is important that this needs to be looked at, that this needs to be studied. Not easy, but we have to step in and say, what is going on here? We have to learn to see that an emotion is just a messenger and nothing more than that. And that is very hard because emotions can be devastating. Especially when we're in a situation for a long time where things come to an eruption or to an explosion. You see that in relationships, for example, or when suddenly somebody is ripped out of your life by disease or accident. There is a huge, a terrible explosion of energy involved with that emotion. So it takes time, and you have to give yourself that time. But in the meantime, you need also to try to find reason and purpose in all that is happening, so that you eventually end up doing something positive and constructive with the event. The most difficult obstacle that we have here is ego. It is because of ego that we hold on to the emotion. And it is ego that prevents us from going beyond the initial hit of the emotion and see reason in it. When people are very emotional and you try to calm them down, they sometimes become angry. Because of ego, ego tells them they have a right to be emotional. And it does not allow you to see that you're doing damage to yourself, but also to the people around you, and often the people that you love. Try to be aware of how that works. Try to be aware of how ego is in play here. Many people who are involved in yoga books, they will say that ego must die. Right? Can ego die? Never. It is an indivisible part of who we are and how we function. So ego cannot die. But there are different ways of ego, how ego manifests. Look at politics. I have to stay away from politics, but it always gives such a wonderful, visible example of certain situations, in this case, ego. The United States politics is very tumultuous, as you probably know if you follow the news a little bit. Then you see, in the first place, people that reach the highest levels of government always have a big ego. Big ego is a big ball of energy that needs to manifest. Yeah? But there are two ways to manifest, and we have had very clear demonstration in those two different ways. From 2004 until 2012, there was a president that had his ego under control and manifested as a peacemaker, trying to create harmony on a national level and on an international level. No, 2008 until 2016. Then came another president. He was totally the opposite. Big ego, but not a peacemaker, not a harmony creator, but very destructive, destroying everything that had been established up to that point. Fortunately, only one term, and then comes another big ego into the seat of government who goes about restoring harmony again, building bridges again, restoring all the relationships that had been damaged, destroyed even, restoring the trust that had been lost. So ego is indivisible part of who we are. It cannot die. What we can do, if it is an obstacle, is to learn to bring it under control. And that starts, of course, in the first place by observing how it is functioning within us. And then when we feel that we are driven by ego, that we step in and say, I'm not going to go this way. I'm not going to let this happen this way. Because it will have repercussions. It will lead to conflict. I will be unhappy, others will be unhappy. Nobody is helped with that. Once you start seeing that, you naturally want to do the effort. The thing is that everything that we are discussing here takes effort. And if you are lazy, and naturally human beings are lazy by nature, you'd rather choose the comfortable way out. But now you start to see that the comfortable way out often leads to conflict, suffering, misery of some form. So you naturally will put in the effort simply to avoid that. Also because you become aware that the way that you act and react affects other people. If you react in a destructive way, in a negative way, based on ego and emotion, it affects people in a negative way. If you act in a constructive way, in a positive way, it affects people in a positive way. And when you start seeing that, that is the only thing that you want to achieve from then on. That is purity. Purity, regardless of the circumstances, to act in the way that you feel is right. Not just because the circumstances are a little bit challenging, that you just change the way that you deal with it, but that you stick to your principles. And emotions, we will come back to emotions more often because that is a huge part of yoga, giving insight in how emotions we have a tendency to see emotions as a negative thing, but from our point of view, emotions are actually a positive thing because they teach us who we are. They teach us where we are. They teach us, they show us where we need to change things. Because emotions are triggered because something is off. Because we are in a place where we don't want to be or should not be. Or in a situation where we should not be. When we fail to see that rationally on a mental level, we get hit by a bus, we get hit by an emotion. And that emotion is kind of a wake-up call, shaking you saying, hey, pay attention, there is something going wrong here. The result of practicing purity is also that it will lead you to discovering your true self, self-realization, that is called in yoga. Many people will say, I am myself, this is who I am. And that is of course true, but what most people are not aware of is their deeply seated true characteristics that go beyond how we are trained, educated, that go beyond our cultural identity, that go beyond everything that we identify with. It is through yoga, everything that we discuss here, but yoga in general, that we end up in self-realization. And that transcends all the identifications that we have grown up with. We will come back to that also further down the road. Questions about Shaucha? Okay, let's have a short break then.